What's up everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tyler Wells, how the hell are ya? Today I'm going to be talking about my struggle with social anxiety. So in order to fully tell my struggle with social anxiety, I really need to go back to the early years. All throughout elementary, middle, and high school, I was bullied. I was made fun of, constantly ridiculed for how skinny my jeans were, the group of girls that I hung out with, and the fact that I didn't hang out with men. I got bullied simply for just existing, and I never bothered anyone, and that was really hard back then. If you've seen my coming out story, you'll know that I suppressed my authentic self and my emotions for a really long time, for 18 years. I think that kind of led to how my social anxiety developed, because as you guys know, I came out when I was 18. So 2015 is when I moved to Santa Barbara, and for the first time lived on my own, completely on my own. I was able to finally be myself for the first time and authentically express my true gay self and discover myself for the first time on my own. For those 2 years, I lived with friends. I was in college. We were drinking every weekend. So on top of discovering myself on my own in a lot of ways that I wasn't able to do for the past 18 years, I was heavily drinking. I was drinking every weekend with my friends, as normal college kids do. I really think that contributed to the development of my social anxiety, because it's not good to drink that much alcohol that frequently. And at the time I was working at Starbucks, it was a constant cycle of party, go to work. Party, go to work. And I was going to school, but it was just those three things for 2 years, from 2015 to 2017. I lived with a bunch of girls that were all UCSB students, and they were a couple years older than me. So in 2018, after living with them for 2 years, the best 2 years college experience of my life, they finally graduated. And I knew that I was still a city college student. I had a lot of shame that they were graduating and ready to move on, and I was still stuck at city college, and I really wanted to follow in their footsteps and graduate and get out of Santa Barbara. So 2018 was really the first shift, I would say, when my friends graduated and left. I was faced with reality, and I was faced with a lot of things I had been distracted from over the past 3 years of living in Santa Barbara. And once all of the fun had subsided, it was like I was faced with reality. The only way I can compare it is like New Year's Day after New Year's Eve. The fun is over and you're left with the mess of what's really there. I still had a couple friends left in Santa Barbara once my main core group graduated and moved away. So I'm glad I was still able to surround myself with people, because the thought of living alone really terrified me then. I was working at Starbucks at the time. I got promoted to a shift supervisor. So I was working a lot of hours, and I just remember during those days at Starbucks, I used to love being on the register, because I feel like I'm really good at talking to people, and I used to love talking to people and getting to know the people that would come into our store. And I used to pride myself on how social I used to be. Being at that front register, you have the most communication with the customers that come in. But in 2018, I would find myself getting super nervous and uncomfortable talking to random customers that would come in, and even some of the regular customers that would come in. I would find it really hard to converse with them, and I would just get really anxious. And when I would get anxious, I would have a very physical reaction. Like when I would get anxious, I would get that fight or flight response, and my lips quiver. It was just a very physical reaction that I would get tripped up about, and in my mind overanalyze what was happening to me physically, and I would assume that they could notice and they were watching and they were judging me. When that started happening at Starbucks, I started questioning, like, what is going on? I'm not usually this nervous all the time. Like, why am I so shaky? I've always been a workaholic and seasoned to just work through things. So that's what I did. I just worked through all of this. Soon enough, the dread of being on the front register talking to people consumed me so much, to the point where I'd show up for a shift at Starbucks and ask to be on bar, which is the person making drinks, because when you're making drinks, you don't have that social interaction as much as you do on register. So I would ask to be put on bar making beverages instead of having to be on the register and talk to people. And when I couldn't, I was very flighty. I would talk only when I had to. I would try and hurry up the conversation to get them out, to get to the next customer, so that my social interactions would be limited, because it was that dreadful to me. And I just always had this fear in me. At the time, I didn't know that that was anxiety. I just had these strange feelings that I did not know what they were or how to combat them. I remember like the peak moments of my anxiety back then were in the mornings when I would work a morning shift. The line would be out the door and I would be the only one on register, and I would feel like the entire line is staring at me. I'm trying to do my best to be quick and like get people in and out, but I just remember like those times when the line would be out the door and I would just be completely uncomfortable and wanting to escape. But you know, it's work, you can't escape, you're stuck there, you can't run away from work, but that's what your fight or flight response wants you to do, wants you to get out of that situation. So this feeling really started in 2018 once my friends left and I was kind of faced with everything. Once I realized that this anxious feeling at work was carrying over into my personal life. For example, I would go to the gas station and go inside to the gas station attendant and ask him to put $20 on pump, whatever. Or at the grocery store checking out, and you know, usually you talk to the person that's checking out your groceries, but I would just assume that they were judging me or making fun of me in their head. So I would look down, and you know, when you're putting your card in and you try to avoid eye contact, don't talk at all unless they talk to you, looking down, waiting for your card to get done, and hurry up and get out of there. Everywhere I went, I thought people were making fun of me, and I thought people were judging me or over-analyzing me. Once I realized that that feeling, which originated at work at Starbucks, was carrying over into my personal matters, that's when I knew that it was a problem. And when it came to school, it was just as prominent because I would be sitting in class trying to focus on the lecture, but I would fear having to raise my hand to speak up or dreading the moment the professor calls on you and having to speak out in front of the class. That was the most anxious moment for me. And at City College, one of the last classes that I had to take as some of my requirements was communication. I held that class off until the very last moment because I knew that class had presentations and speaking in front of the class, and I was never good at that. I dreaded that since day one, doing that in middle school, elementary school, whatever. That was peak anxiety for me, having to speak in front of large groups. It terrified me beyond belief. It just so happened that that was the last class I needed to take for my requirements in 2018 while this other anxiety was going on. So I had to take this communication class in the peak of me struggling with all this anxiety. That's when I started Googling what all of these feelings were and what they meant, and I came across the term social anxiety. It fit everything that I had been experiencing and feeling. I'd always heard that word. Some people misuse the term social anxiety, like, oh, I just don't like talking to people. But I don't think people understand that social anxiety is like a genuine fear of talking to people. And mind you, I used to be really good at talking to people and striking up conversations with strangers, and that's pretty much what Starbucks was, is like making connections with strangers. But after a couple of years, it all came to a halt, and it was just like a daily dread and a daily struggle that I couldn't get away from. So around the time that I Googled social anxiety and figured that's what I might have, I can't exactly remember how soon after, but I ended up getting a therapist for the very first time. On that note, something that I don't think is talked about very much with depression and anxiety is memory loss. There's a lot of 2018 and 2019 that I don't really remember because I was so anxious. It's hard for me to look back and, pinpoint exactly when things happened, but sure enough, I ended up getting a therapist for the very first time. I just remember feeling so helpless and vulnerable, and I needed help that bad. I finally had a safe place to talk about it and let it all out. That was really nice to have finally for the first time in my life. And so around the same time I got a therapist for the first time, I was still in this communication class, and that at the time seemed like the biggest of my struggles because I had to get through that class and I did not know how I was going to. In that communication class, we had to do 2 big speeches in that semester. That very first speech, I was just telling Rebecca in therapy, I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I can't do it. I was so certain that I would not be able to do that speech, and I had my heart set. I told her, look, I'm not gonna do it. I can't do it. She would try and tell me, like, what if you just try? Like, what if you start working on the project and see how much of it you can get done, and if you really can't do it the day of, you tried. And so I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, you're right. Let me at least try and work on the project. It was a PowerPoint, so let me just do the PowerPoint work and see how much of it I can get done. Stayed up all night doing the PowerPoint presentation, and once I was confident in the material that I was going to present, it made me feel a little bit better about the idea of having to present, but I still was completely set. I was not going to be able to do that. So I did some Googling, and I found out there's a thing called beta blockers, which I had no idea existed. And beta blockers basically slow slow your heart rate. It's not a medication that you take daily. It's something you take situationally when you know there's going to be something very anxious coming up. It slows your heart rate down so that you're not shaky and your heart is not beating out of your chest. So sure enough, I went to the doctor and asked them about it. They gave me some beta blockers and a couple things of Xanax to try for the first time. But, you know, they warned me that those are very addictive and they don't recommend giving those because you can get hooked on them really easily. So I practiced my speech. I practiced in a room pointing to the presentation what it would be like to be up there in front of the class doing it. I would try out these beta blockers and then they calmed me down enough to just be able to speak. On the day of the speech, I wasn't sure if I was actually going to be able to do it, but I took those beta blockers. I took half of a Xanax and I did it. I did the speech. I got up there and it was terrifying in the moment and I wasn't able to make much eye contact, but you know, I got it done and I powered through it. And that moment for me was a really, really big accomplishment for my journey in social anxiety. Getting through that speech when a week prior I was dead set on not doing it was a huge feat for me, and I have my old therapist to thank for, you know, helping me get through that and really empowering me to just take baby steps, which ultimately led to me doing it. And you know, a month later when that second speech came around, I did that with flying colors. It was so much easier to do that second speech because I was able to do the first one. Accomplishing that speech all on my own with the help of medication, which is okay, is one of my biggest accomplishments and something I'm very, very proud of. At the beginning of 2019, coming off the high of successfully completing my 2 communication class speeches, I got the offer to work for the Baldwins. Making that jump from working at Starbucks to going to working for the Baldwins was another huge success for me, and as excited as I was to move on from Starbucks, I knew that this new position brought on a lot of new stress and anxiety for me. I still was navigating my own daily anxiety and figuring out how to cope with that. The first couple of months working for the Baldwins, I would say were pretty good. I was just going through the motions, I would say, at that point, and everything came to a halt in April of 2019. In April of 2019, I went to Coachella, which, if you know anything about me, I am obsessed with Coachella. Went with a couple friends and we camped. It was an amazing time. I have a video of that on my channel if you want to see it. But during that weekend, I took ecstasy, and not only did I take it one day, I took it 2 days in a row. And if you know anything about ecstasy, it depletes you of any serotonin. It depletes you of any serotonin even doing 1 day of ecstasy, but I did 2 days in a row. I remember coming back to work on that Monday following Coachella, literally feeling like a shell of a human being. Not only did I come back anxious as hell, but I came back with a feeling of depression I have never had before. I felt like there was an eternal cloud above my head that I could not get to go away, and I would have to go to work for China and fake it. I would try and hide it as much as I could, and I don't think I did a very good job of it, because I remember China came up to me one day and was like, "Are you okay?" I think I just started crying to her because I really wasn't okay. I felt like my whole life was in shambles. You know, my brain felt like mush. I had brain fog. I couldn't think. I have a story that I'll tell you guys. One of the worst things and worst mistakes I've ever made working for the Baldwins happened during this time period of extreme brain fog, and because of the choice I made to take ecstasy 2 days in a row at Coachella. So I kind of just hoped that it would go away, and I waited it out, but after a month, it was worse than ever, and I just felt like eternal doom. I did not feel suicidal, but I could not shake this feeling of waking up every single day dreading work, dreading life in general, feeling sad, feeling anxious, just feeling like there was no point of living. And it was a thought and feeling that I could not get rid of. And that's when, you know, I decided that therapy alone was not going to heal this, and I needed medication. So I talked to my therapist and told her that I was interested in trying some kind of medication, some kind of antidepressant, and she didn't think it was a bad idea. She supported me in my decision. If you have a therapist, you know that they can't prescribe medication. So I had to go find a psychiatrist in Santa Barbara, and I did. It's funny with psychiatrists. With therapists, they want to know your whole life story. They're there to support you. They're there to talk things out. But with psychiatrists, they're just like there to figure out what you want from them and what medication you want. So it was a 5-minute conversation on what I'd been feeling, what I was going through, and I ended up getting prescribed Lexapro, which is an SSRI. It's an antidepressant. I had no questions about it. I was just like, okay, sign me up. Sure, it's gonna make me feel better. Sure, it was in June of 2019 that I finally got prescribed Lexapro. I remember finally receiving the medication and going to pick it up for the first time and being so excited that finally I felt like I had a relief coming to the suffering that I was in. It takes 2 weeks to kick in from the moment that you start taking Lexapro. And I'll never forget, 2 weeks from when I started taking it, I went to Canada, to Banff, Canada with my grandparents. And I have a video of that if you'd like to see that trip, but I'll never ever forget. It was on that trip to Canada that I felt the Lexapro kick in, and it was a game changer. I felt like a light turned on in me that had been off for a really, really long time. This is so random, but I couldn't drink coffee in the morning. I've always loved coffee. I grew up drinking coffee, but during these anxious years, I wouldn't even be able to have a sip of coffee in the morning because of how anxious it made me. I remember on that trip to Canada, I tried coffee one of the mornings I was there, and it made me feel great. I felt confident. I didn't feel anxious. I was on that vacation with my grandparents and their friends, and I don't know them that well, so in a normal situation, I would have been super anxious talking to them, but I had no anxiety at all, and I felt like a switch was flipped. I can't even really describe it, but I just felt like me again. I remember coming back to Santa Barbara and hanging out with Dia, who I live with now, being on the beach. We went to the beach together as soon as I got back from Canada, and it was one of the first few times we ever hung out. So I started becoming friends with Dia and the people I live with now right around the time that my medication kicked in. So I kind of look at June 2019 as kind of like a reset point and a new chapter for me. Everything changed then, but I remember being with Dia on the beach and looking at the ocean, looking at the mountains, and for so long I was trapped in my own anxious bubble that was, I only thought about things that were right in front of me. I only thought about the thoughts that were in my head that consumed me, but I remember looking at the mountains and the ocean and for once being able to appreciate the beauty of Santa Barbara. I remember saying out loud like, wow, Dia, we're so blessed to live here, and that was a thought I wasn't capable of thinking in a really, really long time. And so from that point on, everything changed for the better. Lexapro truly, truly, honestly saved my life. To this day, I'm still on Lexapro. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some people think of and need medication as a temporary readjustment, but I think for other people, it's okay to use medication as a crutch. Of course, I've thought about going off antidepressants over the years and what that might be like, but I've been too scared to kind of figure that out for myself. At this moment, I'm okay with using it because it gets me through the day, being able to talk to people without feeling like they're judging me. I can talk to people and actively listen to what they're saying and not sit there and think about, do I look stupid? Do I sound stupid? Are they judging me? Are they making fun of me? It gets me through my everyday life, anxiety-wise. I no longer feel chained down by social anxiety, and I can get through my days now. That's all thanks to Lexapro, and maybe one day I'll feel like I don't need it, but right now I'm okay with using Lexapro as my crutch. But looking back, I think the social anxiety was a result of, being bullied my whole life, suppressing things for so long, and excessive alcohol definitely, and of course the ecstasy probably triggered something in me, 100% chemical imbalance. It was just a series of unfortunate circumstances that were bound to happen at some point maybe. I'm just glad that, I'm back to feeling like me. Of course, I still feel anxiety and I still feel anxious and I still get depressed. I've kind of had to find my balance for my meds of that sweet spot of what's too much. When I'm on too high of a dose of Lexapro, I feel too zombie-like. I have found the sweet spot where I don't feel like a zombie, but I don't feel the daily anxious dread that I used to feel. I can function to the best of my ability. Everything is manageable now. And, I really am grateful and thankful for medication for saving me. That's the only way I can put it. If there's anybody with social anxiety out there, I needed to get help when I realized my daily life was being consumed by this anxiety. And if you're realizing that it's consuming your daily life too, that's when you know it's time to get help, because you shouldn't have to go through every single day feeling like you want to run away or feeling like people are out to get you. There are options out there. There is help out there. For some people, it might be therapy. For some people, it might be meditation. For some people, example, it might be going to the gym. None of those things work for me personally. Medication and antidepressants were what worked for me. That may not work for you, but there's nothing wrong with trying things out. I was lucky enough to find a medication that worked for me on the first try, but a lot of my friends and people I know have tried Lexapro and they don't like it. They don't like how it makes them feel. So what is right for me may not be right for you. And just like with a therapist, you should shop around different medications until you find the one that's best fit for you. Because like I said, what's right for me doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. So just know that there is help out there. You know, I crap on my tattoo that I have a lot just because I think it's kind of corny, but it really is true that this too shall pass. As cringy as it may be at times, it's a constant reminder. Back then, in the peak of my social anxiety, it seemed like things would never get better. But, you know, looking back on it, I overcame that. It passed. So as corny as it is, things will get better. And a month, 2 months, a year from now, you will look back and it will no longer be as heavy as it may feel right now. So remember that there's always options, there's always help out there, and you are not alone. All right, you guys, that's it for today. That's been my experience with social anxiety. Comment down below if you have any questions or if there's anything I can help anyone with. I'm here for you. I'll catch you guys on the next one.